Hi everybody, my name is Lacey, and today the purpose of this video is to briefly discuss how to write a SOAP note clinical document. So before we get started, I want to supply just a little bit of background information. About a year ago, whenever I started my job as a community living support therapist in a pediatric clinic, I was given a wonderful orientation from my employer about how to write SOAP note documentation. And she took special care the fact that she knew that I was going to be applying for SLP grad school in the future. So she wanted me to have a very good understanding of how to write SOAP note documents for the future, for my future use as a speech therapist. And so she gave me a wonderful overview, and but amidst that overview, I think I kind of still struggled with the process in the beginning, just like any new professional does, because I wanted to be as thorough as possible, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing everything the correct way. So for me, that meant looking online, trying to find more information about how to write SOAP notes to help me bridge what I was taught at my orientation and kind of get a better handle of it and a new perspective perhaps. But what I found whenever I was researching it, there was lots and lots of information about writing SOAP notes. But what the problem was that it was often so clinically worded that it was very hard to get a good grasp on it. So what I'm going to do today, I want to take a lot of the clinical wording out of the process and just supply with you with a very brief and straight to the point video resource for you to use whenever you're writing your next SOAP note if you find that you keep having trouble with it. So let's get started. First things first, you may be wondering, if you've never written a SOAP note or if you're just new to this process in general, what is a SOAP note? A SOAP note is a clinical term for the type of documentation that therapists from all different fields, such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, applied behavioral analysis therapy, doctors, nurses, people in just the service sector in general. It's a clinical term for a type of document that they use. And a SOAP note is divided into 4 areas for you to supply relevant information about what you did with your client during the time that you saw them and worked with them, or assessed them, or whatever went on during the time that the SOAP note is reflecting. So with the SOAP note, it's a clinical acronym, and it stands for 4 different things. The S means subjective, the O means objective, the A means assessment, and the P means plan. So for this video, we'll just go step by step into the process, and we'll discuss what each of the letters in the acronym mean whenever you're writing the document. And at the end, I will give you a little bit more of a resource that you can access on my website. I'll tell you a little bit more about that whenever we get finished. So let's move into the S part. So S means subjective. So basically in the subjective part, it's the first part of the note. So it's the things that you're going to put that are historical in nature in the life of your client, and also they're very subjective observations. So for example, this can provide a lot of different kinds of information. For example, some of the information that you might want to supply would be, were there any health or safety stressors that occurred during the time that you worked with your client that need to be documented? You could also document, were there any medicine changes that your client has underwent before or soon after the session that need to be documented. Another thing would be, you can document here your client's behavior, their cooperation level throughout the session, as well as their mood, and also things that you hear or that are told to you by either the client or the caregiver. So I kind of think of this this part of the SOAP note as it's subjective, and the fact that it's kind of hearsay. You're going to discuss anything that is of importance that you were told or that you observed. but it's not things that we can measure with percentages or ratios or analysis of what you did during the time that you worked with your client. So this is more so thinking in two different parameters with the subjective part of the SOAP note. The first parameter you think of is what was I told, and the second parameter is what did I observe. Okay, so moving on. So objective is more measurable, and it deals with a measurement of how your client performed within the parameters of a treatment-based session or a diagnostic-based session. So with objective, you're going to, this is where you're going to supply information about collected data. So this is going to be your percentages, your ratios, your ability to work with your client to see how they measure up either within a diagnostic test or assessment, or how they measure up based on the goals and objectives that are a part of their individualized intervention treatment plan. So diagnostically, if you're writing a SOAP note, in this area of the note, you would mention things such as the percentages achieved during the assessment, how they stacked up on subtests, the level of prompting or cues that they required. And you would also discuss in this section just basic performance measures. How did your client do on the assessment? And how did they measure up with what you were trying to test for? And then within a treatment-based session, this would look like you would list the goals and objectives usually that you worked on with your client, and you would just supply a measurable outlook into how they did with those goals and objectives. So if you have percentages or ratios, you would actually document how the client met those goals or ratios throughout the session with what was being targeted. So in this section, whereas subjective was hearsay, just kind of think of objective as factual and measurable. This is where you're just going to put that information down so that you know how your client did that session and how they're progressing in whatever you were trying to assess or treat them for. The A stands for assessment, and this is just kind of can be thought of as a bridge between the subjective and the objective parts of the SOAP note. So, and it provides us with a deeper look into how the overall session looked and how it worked and what were the outcomes of it. In this section, in a diagnostic session, if you're doing a diagnostic assessment, once again, this would be where you would record conclusions that are based on the client's performance with the goal or with the goal of providing a relevant assessment or test for them. And you would also put in this section further recommendations that may be applicable for that client. So for example, if you have a client within the speech therapy world that was having a assessment done for their receptive language and they scored well below what was a norm expectation for their age group, you would put in this section recommendations for therapy, or whether you have a recommendation for further assessment. So this is just kind of where you put into place an idea of what could be possible future outcomes to be conducted with that client. And in a treatment-based session, you're going to record the relevant information that provides how well your client is stacking up to goals and objectives. So with this section, it's going to provide a deeper interpretation of the objective section, and it's also going to record perhaps the level of prompting and cues that was used so that you get a better understanding of, well, this client didn't do so well with their ability to meet their goal or objective because they needed much more prompting or cueing today. Their level of prompting was much larger than it normally is. And then so you kind of get to track that as the client progresses in goals and objectives. You see that perhaps the level of prompting is going down and they become more independent in what they're able to accomplish. So pretty much in just this area, you're marking the performance and you're providing a deeper look into how the session worked to supply that performance level of the client. And then finally, P stands for plan, and this is basically any future plan of action that you're going to use for that client. So, for example, the P section is usually worded with a future tense mindset. So it's we will do this with the client. So it's very much future mindset driven, and it deals basically with what you're going to do for the client either after a therapy session or a diagnostic session. And this is where you would discuss any relevant changes that are going to not just be, this is not a section for recommendations. This is a section where you're actually going to prescribe what you say you're going to do. So, for example, if you have a client that needs to continue having services, perhaps they're a school-based client, and they need to have a continuation of services in the summer by a private clinic. This would be, you would state that the client will continue services in the summer outside of school services, or you can word it different ways. You don't have to take that example. But this is just where you would also mark changes that you are going to actually induce in their treatment plan. And it also is a place for referrals. So if you have a client, for example, that needs to have an audiological test because you suspect that their hearing is not at where it's supposed to be, this would be the section where you would say that you would refer them for therapy of an audiological assessment. So I hope that you were able to find this video informative. And you can also, if you need just a general example of how to write a SOAP note, feel free to go to my website, adventuresinspeechtherapy.weebly.com. And this video is actually going to be a part of a new post on my website called Teach Me Something Today. And this is where I'm going to highlight different subjects and topics that I feel like others may need more information on and that I would like to teach other people within the field of speech-language pathology. So you can go to that, and on this post I'm going to supply just an example fictitious SOAP note that can kind of gear you in towards more of a straightforward, perhaps, view of how this all works. So I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope that you learned something and that this video was relevant to your needs. And thank you very much for watching. Thank you.